The Galactic Academy, an institution known across the universe for shaping the brightest minds and strongest leaders, stood as a beacon of hope for interspecies cooperation. It was a place where representatives of countless civilizations came together to learn, grow, and collaborate. The sprawling campus orbited a serene gas giant in neutral territory, its shining spires reaching toward the stars. Students from every corner of the galaxy filled its halls, their diversity a testament to the Academy's mission of unity. Among them were the Gorathians, towering beings with dense, muscular frames and a natural affinity for strategy, and humans, comparatively diminutive but renowned for their adaptability. Tarek, a cadet from the Gorathian Empire, was a rising star. With his deep blue skin, glowing amber eyes, and an imposing height that dwarfed nearly every other species, Tarek carried himself with the confidence of one destined for greatness. Among his peers, his reputation was well established. Tarek excelled in every challenge the Academy presented, from combat simulations to tactical war games. His victories were not just the result of brute strength but a sharp, calculating mind. Yet, for all his achievements, Tarek harbored a disdain for weakness. He believed in strength above all else, and, to him, humans epitomized fragility. Zach, a cadet from Earth, arrived at the Academy with far less fanfare. Average in height, with unremarkable features and a quiet demeanor, Zach blended into the crowd. Humans were a minority at the Academy, often viewed as curious anomalies rather than equals. Their home planet, Earth, was classified as a Deathworld, a term that described planets with extreme environmental hazards, teeming with predators and natural disasters. Despite this reputation, most species saw humans as physically unimpressive and prone to emotional fragility. Tarek's first encounter with Zach occurred during a group training session. The task was simple: navigate a simulated jungle filled with holographic predators and reach an extraction point. Teams were randomly assigned, and Zach found himself paired with Tarek. From the outset, Tarek made his disdain clear. As the team leader, he barked orders and dismissed Zach's suggestions, viewing the human's presence as a liability. Zach, however, remained composed, following instructions without complaint. The simulation quickly escalated in difficulty. Holographic creatures, programmed to mimic real predators, emerged from the dense foliage, their glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws designed to test the cadet's resolve. Tarek relied on his strength, dispatching the creatures with ease. Zach, on the other hand, used stealth and cunning, avoiding unnecessary confrontations and conserving energy. Tarek scoffed at what he perceived as cowardice, loudly proclaiming that true warriors faced challenges head-on. Zach didn't argue, instead focusing on the task at hand. As the team approached the extraction point, a holographic predator ambushed them. The creature, a massive feline with scales instead of fur, lunged at Tarek. He met the attack head-on, grappling with the beast in a display of raw power. Zach observed from the sidelines, scanning the environment for an advantage. Spotting a loose vine hanging from a nearby tree, Zach quickly fashioned a makeshift snare. As Tarek struggled to overpower the creature, Zach used the snare to immobilize it, allowing Tarek to deliver the finishing blow. The simulation ended successfully, but instead of gratitude, Tarek offered only a grudging acknowledgement. To him, Zach's actions were a reminder of human weakness, the reliance on tools and tricks instead of strength. In the weeks that followed, Tarek's disdain for Zach only grew. The human cadet's quiet competence and unassuming nature made him an easy target. Tarek took every opportunity to belittle Zach, often in front of their peers. He mocked Zach's physique, his reliance on strategy, and even the concept of Earth as a death world. "If your planet is so dangerous," Tarek sneered during a lunch break, "how is it that humans look so fragile?" Zach didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he replied calmly, "Survival isn't about strength, it's about adaptability." His words, while simple, struck a chord with some of their classmates. Among the cadets, there were those who admired Zach's resilience and quiet confidence. Tarek, however, saw it as arrogance. The turning point came during an interspecies competition, a highly anticipated event designed to test the cadets' survival skills. Each participant would face a randomly generated simulation tailored to mimic the conditions of their homeworld. The challenge was meant to promote understanding and appreciation for the unique hardships faced by different species. Tarek, confident in his abilities, viewed the competition as an opportunity to solidify his dominance. Zach's participation, however, fueled Tarek's determination to prove the inferiority of humans. When the matchups were announced, Tarek's excitement turned to irritation. The simulation assigned to him was not Garathian but a Deathworld scenario modeled after Earth. The environment was a vast desert, its scorching heat and venomous wildlife designed to mimic the harshest conditions of the human home planet. Tarek, accustomed to Garathian jungles and mountains, underestimated the challenge. In contrast, Zack seemed almost at ease, his familiarity with the setting giving him a quiet advantage. As the cadets prepared for the simulation, Tarek couldn't resist one last jab. "Let's see how long your tricks and tools last in a real test," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Zack simply nodded, his expression unreadable. The simulation began with a blinding flash of light as the participants were transported into the desert environment. The sun blazed overhead, its intensity amplified to test endurance. The ground, a mixture of sand and jagged rocks, radiated heat that seemed to seep into every pore. Tarek started strong, using his strength to cover ground quickly. He crushed smaller predators underfoot and scaled rocky outcroppings with ease. Zack, however, moved deliberately, his pace measured. He scanned the horizon, searching for signs of water and shade. Within an hour, the differences in their approaches became apparent. Tarek's aggressive tactics left him exposed to the elements. His heavy frame, so advantageous in other environments, became a liability in the desert heat. Zack, meanwhile, conserved his energy, utilizing the sparse vegetation for cover and locating a hidden spring to replenish his water supply. As the simulation progressed, it became clear that Tarek's confidence had blinded him to the unique challenges of this Deathworld scenario. By the end of the first day, Tarek's initial bravado had given way to frustration. His movements became sluggish, his breathing labored. Meanwhile, Zack thrived, his intimate knowledge of survival in extreme conditions allowing him to navigate the environment with ease. Tarek's peers, watching from the observation deck, began to question their assumptions about human fragility. The contrast between the two cadets highlighted a fundamental truth: survival wasn't about strength alone. It was about the ability to adapt and endure. As the sun set on the first day of the simulation, Tarek found himself questioning his preconceived notions. For the first time, he began to see Zack not as a rival to be defeated but as a puzzle to be understood. The stage was set for a lesson that would challenge everything Tarek believed about strength, survival, and the true meaning of being a warrior. The simulation's second day began with an oppressive heat wave that pressed down like an unrelenting force, draining energy from everything it touched. The holographic desert stretched endlessly, its barren expanse broken only by jagged rock formations and sparse, scraggly vegetation. The environment was designed to mimic the harshest conditions of Earth's deserts, and every detail was meant to push the cadets to their limits. Tarek, already fatigued from the previous day's exertions, awoke to find himself in worse condition than anticipated. Muscles ached from dehydration, his skin burned from exposure, and frustration churned in his mind. For someone who had never truly struggled before, the sensation of defeat was unfamiliar and deeply unsettling. The day's objective, displayed on the wrist communicator issued to each participant, was to traverse a series of checkpoints and collect supplies hidden along the route. These checkpoints, scattered across the simulation zone, were strategically placed to test navigation, resourcefulness, and endurance. The challenge appeared straightforward, yet the desert had a way of complicating even the simplest tasks. For Tarek, the idea of navigating this inhospitable terrain alone felt like an insult. His pride dictated that a warrior of Garathian stature should dominate such trials, but the reality was proving to be far less forgiving. Zack, on the other hand, approached the challenge with a methodical calm. After waking early, he took time to survey the horizon from a vantage point he had climbed the previous evening. The rock formation, which provided shade during the night, also offered a clear view of the terrain ahead. Using a combination of observation and the basic tools provided for the simulation, Zack plotted a route that would minimize exposure to direct sunlight while maximizing the chances of finding natural resources like water and shade. This careful planning contrasted starkly with Tarek's brute force approach, where speed and strength often replaced strategy. As the cadets moved toward the first checkpoint, the differences in their styles became even more apparent. Tarek relied on bursts of energy to cover large distances quickly, but this approach left him vulnerable to the heat and increasingly disoriented. The holographic predators, programmed to behave like Earth's desert creatures, only added to the challenge. A large, reptilian creature resembling an Earth monitor lizard crossed Tarek's path, its forked tongue flickering as it studied the towering figure before it. Tarek, driven by instinct and pride, charged at the creature, intending to overpower it with sheer force. The creature, however, darted out of reach and disappeared into the rocks, leaving Tarek panting and empty-handed. Zack, observing from a distance, took a different approach. When he encountered the same holographic predator later in the day, he avoided direct confrontation. Instead, Zack used the creature's behavior to his advantage. By observing its movements, he deduced the location of a hidden water source, which the predator frequented. This careful observation not only allowed Zack to replenish his water supply, but also reinforced the idea that survival was as much about understanding the environment as it was about endurance. The second checkpoint was located at the base of a canyon, accessible only through a narrow, winding path that required careful navigation. Tarek reached the canyon first but found himself increasingly frustrated by the terrain. The narrow path, bordered by sharp rocks, made it impossible to rely on speed or brute force. Each step required precision, and the lack of a clear route tested his patience. By the time Tarek reached the checkpoint, his frustration had turned to anger, directed as much at himself as at the challenge. Zack arrived shortly after, his approach markedly different. Having studied the layout of the canyon from a distance, he identified a natural wind tunnel that funneled cool air through the rocks. By following this path, Zack not only reached the checkpoint more comfortably but also conserved energy for the challenges ahead. At the checkpoint, Zack noticed signs of Tarek's struggle-scuffed rocks, heavy footprints, and even a discarded piece of equipment. The sight evoked a mix of concern and curiosity. Zack knew the Galactic Cadet was capable of great feats of strength, but it was becoming clear that Tarek's reliance on those strengths was also a vulnerability. The third leg of the journey presented the most difficult challenge, yet a stretch of desert known as the Wailing Dunes. These holographic sand dunes were programmed to shift unpredictably, simulating real-life desert conditions like quicksand and sudden sandstorms. Tarek, determined to reclaim his pride, charged into the dunes without hesitation. The shifting sands, however, sapped his energy with every step, and the heat reflecting off the golden surface created a mirage effect that disoriented him further. By the time a sandstorm rolled in, Tarek was dangerously close to collapse. Zack, following at a slower pace, spotted the incoming storm from a distance. Drawing on Earth's history of desert survival, Zack quickly fashioned a makeshift shelter by digging into the base of a dune and using his survival blanket to create a barrier against the wind and sand. As the storm raged around him, Zack remained calm, conserving his strength and waiting for the storm to pass. After the winds subsided, Zack emerged from his shelter and continued his journey, his careful planning allowing him to maintain his energy reserves. When Zack finally caught up to Tarek, it was clear that the Galactic Cadet was in dire straits. Exhausted and dehydrated, Tarek had collapsed near a small outcrop, his powerful frame reduced to a state of vulnerability. Despite the competitive nature of the simulation, Zack's instincts as a survivor and a fellow cadet took over. Using the limited supplies he had, Zack helped stabilize Tarek's condition, offering water and shade while assessing the situation. The act of assistance, though unspoken, carried a weight that neither cadet fully acknowledged in the moment. As the day drew to a close, the two cadets found themselves resting under the same outcrop, the tension between them replaced by an unspoken truce. The simulation, designed to test individual strength and resilience, had instead highlighted the value of cooperation and understanding. For Tarek, the experience marked the beginning of a profound realization strength alone was not enough to conquer the challenges of a death world. For Zack, the day reinforced the importance of adaptability and empathy, qualities that had always been at the core of humanity's survival. The second day of the simulation ended with the cadets reflecting on their experiences. While the journey was far from over, the seeds of change had been planted. The holographic desert, with all its dangers and challenges, had become more than just a test of survival. It had become a crucible for growth, pushing both Tarek and Zack toward a deeper understanding of themselves and each other. The third day of the simulation began with a sky painted in deep hues of crimson and gold, the artificial sunrise casting an eerie glow over the endless desert. Tarek stirred from an uneasy rest under the outcrop where he had collapsed the previous evening. His massive frame, usually a source of pride and strength, now felt like a burden as the accumulated toll of dehydration and exhaustion weighed heavily on his every movement. The Galactic Cadet, so accustomed to triumph through sheer willpower and physical might, now faced the sobering reality of his limits. Nearby, Zach worked methodically, preparing for the day ahead. The human cadet had risen early, using the pre-dawn hours to gather what few resources the barren environment offered. Turek observed Zach's movements with a mixture of curiosity and resentment. Despite the human's comparatively slight build and unassuming demeanor, Zach displayed a confidence born of experience. It was not the loud, commanding presence of a warrior, but rather the quiet assurance of someone who understood how to endure. Turek, whose pride had been bruised repeatedly over the course of the simulation, found it increasingly difficult to reconcile his preconceived notions of human weakness with the evidence before him. As the day's objective appeared on their wrist communicators, it became clear that the final phase of the simulation would be the most challenging yet. The cadets were tasked with reaching the central extraction point, a location deep within the desert's heart. The route, intentionally designed to force participants into the harshest and most dangerous conditions, would test every skill they possessed. For Tarek, the announcement brought a flicker of renewed determination. Reaching the extraction point first would allow him to reclaim some of his dignity, proving to himself and the others that he remained a formidable competitor. Zach, however, viewed the objective not as a race but as a test of survival, a challenge that required strategy and careful pacing. The two cadets set off together, their paths converging out of necessity rather than choice. Zach's earlier act of assistance had created an unspoken understanding between them. While Tarek's pride prevented him from openly acknowledging the debt, he no longer dismissed Zach's methods outright. For his part, Zach remained focused on the journey, aware that cooperation, even unspoken, increased their chances of success. As the cadets moved deeper into the desert, the terrain grew increasingly treacherous. The shifting sands of the previous day gave way to jagged rock formations, their sharp edges gleaming in the unforgiving sunlight. Each step required careful navigation, and the oppressive heat tested their endurance. Tarek, whose natural Garathian resilience had carried him through countless challenges, found himself struggling once more. The intense heat, combined with the dehydration he had yet to fully recover from, sapped his strength at an alarming rate. Zach, ever observant, noticed the signs of fatigue and adjusted their pace accordingly. The first major obstacle of the day came in the form of a narrow canyon, its entrance partially obscured by a massive boulder. The only way forward required the cadets to scale the rock face, a task that demanded both strength and precision. Tarek, eager to prove his worth, stepped forward to attempt the climb first. His muscular frame, while advantageous in combat, proved less suited to the delicate task of navigating the narrow footholds and sharp edges. Halfway up, his grip faltered, and he narrowly avoided a dangerous fall. Frustration etched itself onto Tarek's features as he descended, his pride taking yet another blow. Zach approached the task with characteristic pragmatism. Studying the rock face carefully, he identified a series of smaller, more secure handholds that allowed for a steadier ascent. His movements, though slower than Tarek's initial attempt, were deliberate and efficient. Reaching the top, Zach secured a makeshift rope using the limited supplies from his survival pack, creating a safer path for Tarek to follow. The Garathian cadet, though reluctant, accepted the assistance, climbing with the aid of the rope and reaching the summit without further incident. Beyond the canyon, the cadets faced an expanse of rocky plains interrupted by a series of deep crevices. These fissures, concealed beneath layers of loose gravel, presented a hidden danger that required constant vigilance. Zach, whose sharp eyes had been honed through years of practice, spotted the first crevice just in time to prevent Tarek from stepping into it. The human cadet used a long stick he had fashioned earlier to probe the ground ahead, mapping a safe route through the treacherous terrain. Tarek, who had initially dismissed such tools as unnecessary, began to understand their value, though he remained silent on the matter. As the sun reached its zenith, the heat became almost unbearable. The cadets took refuge beneath a rocky overhang, its shade providing a brief reprieve from the relentless sun. Tarek, whose energy reserves were nearly depleted, sank to the ground, his breathing labored. Zach, though visibly tired, maintained his focus, using the downtime to ration their remaining supplies. From his pack, Zach produced a small piece of equipment, a solar-powered water purifier. Using the device, he extracted water from a nearby pool of brackish liquid, providing both cadets with much-needed hydration. Tarek watched in silence, his earlier disdain for human ingenuity replaced by a grudging respect. The simple, efficient device was a stark reminder of the resourcefulness that had allowed humans to thrive on a deathworld like Earth. For the first time, Tarek began to see Zack not as a rival or an anomaly, but as a worthy peer. The final stretch of the journey brought the cadets to a vast salt flat, its shimmering surface creating an illusion of water on the horizon. The reflective terrain amplified the sun's intensity, making each step feel like a battle against the elements. Tarek, whose powerful legs once carried him effortlessly through the densest jungles of Gorath, now moved with a heavy, labored gait. Zack, though also struggling, pressed forward with steady determination, his eyes fixed on the distant marker that signaled the extraction point. As they neared their goal, the cadets encountered one final challenge. A massive holographic predator emerged from the salt flats, its form a nightmarish amalgamation of Earth's most dangerous creatures. The simulation's designers had intended this encounter to push the cadets to their limits, forcing them to confront their fears and rely on their skills. Tarek, summoning the last reserves of his strength, prepared to engage the creature directly. However, Zack intervened, using the environment to their advantage. By creating a diversion with reflective shards of salt, Zack disoriented the predator long enough for both cadets to escape. Reaching the extraction point, the cadets collapsed in exhaustion, the simulation ending with a sudden shift in the environment. The desert dissolved into the sterile, controlled atmosphere of the Academy's training facility. In the silence that followed, Tarek looked at Zack with an expression that carried more weight than words could convey. Though no formal acknowledgement passed between them, the mutual respect was unmistakable. The third day of the simulation had tested not just their physical limits but their ability to adapt, cooperate, and learn from one another. For Tarek, the experience marked the beginning of a transformation, a shift in perspective that challenged his long-held beliefs about strength and superiority. For Zack, it was a reaffirmation of humanity's resilience and the quiet strength that came from understanding one's environment and limitations. Together, the two cadets had faced the desert's trials and emerged not as adversaries but as unlikely allies. The training facility, with its clinical white walls and humming technology, felt like a jarring contrast to the brutal, endless expanse of the desert simulation. Tarek sat on one of the benches in the debriefing chamber, his large hands resting on his knees, the weight of exhaustion evident in his posture. For the first time in years, the proud Gorathian cadet experienced something he rarely encountered: silence within his own mind. Gone was the incessant litany of self-assured thoughts about superiority. Instead, his mind replayed the last 3 days, each moment sharpening a realization he couldn't yet fully articulate. Across the room, Zack methodically packed his gear. His movements were as deliberate as ever, with no wasted energy. The human cadet radiated a quiet sense of accomplishment, but there was no arrogance, no need for validation. Zack had achieved what he set out to do: survive, adapt, and endure. Watching this, Tarek felt a pang of something unfamiliar, not envy, but respect born from recognition. The same qualities he had dismissed as weakness had proven to be the strengths that carried both of them through the simulation. The debriefing began as a holographic display materialized in the center of the room. An instructor, a representative of the Academy's multi-species teaching staff, stood at the center of the projection. Her androgynous features and translucent skin shimmered under the soft glow of the hologram. The instructor's voice, calm yet authoritative, addressed the cadets. The desert simulation is designed to challenge not only your physical endurance but also your adaptability, resourcefulness, and cooperation. These are the qualities that define true leadership in the galactic sphere. Today, we will review your performance, beginning with the individual assessments. The instructor turned to face Tarek, who straightened instinctively, his broad shoulders squared in a posture of attention. The hologram displayed a series of data points: heart rate spikes, energy expenditure, and other metrics highlighting his physical prowess and combat efficiency. However, the analysis was not entirely favorable. Tarek of Gorath, the instructor began, your strength and determination are undeniable. These attributes carried you through the initial stages of the simulation with great success. However, as the environment became increasingly hostile, reliance on brute force proved insufficient. Your struggle to adapt to unfamiliar conditions resulted in unnecessary energy depletion and strategic errors. The word stung, though Tarek had anticipated the critique. He nodded stiffly, his expression a mask of composure. The instructor's tone softened slightly as she continued. However, it is important to note that in the latter stages, you demonstrated the capacity to learn and collaborate. This growth is commendable and marks a significant step in your development as a cadet. The hologram shifted focus to Zach. The display highlighted a different set of metrics: calculated risk-taking, resource management, and environmental analysis. The instructor addressed Zach directly, her tone one of measured approval. Zach of Earth, your performance exemplified adaptability and strategic thinking. Your ability to navigate the simulation's challenges with minimal resources reflects the resilience for which humans are renowned. Furthermore, your actions during moments of crisis demonstrated not only survival instinct but also leadership. Zach's response was understated, a simple nod accompanied by a quiet thank you. The instructor concluded the debriefing with a summary that encompassed both cadets. Together, your actions illustrated the importance of cooperation in overcoming adversity. Survival is not a solitary endeavor but a shared experience. The simulation's purpose is not merely to test individuals but to foster understanding and unity among species. With that, the hologram dissolved, leaving the cadets in silence. Tarek remained seated, his gaze fixed on the floor. Across the room, Zach finished packing and approached, his footsteps light but deliberate. The human cadet stood in front of Tarek, his expression neutral but open. "You did well out there," Zach said, breaking the silence. His voice carried no trace of condescension, only sincerity. "That wasn't easy for either of us." Tarek looked up, meeting Zach's gaze. For a moment, the Garathian cadet said nothing, his amber eyes searching the human's face. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. "You saved me out there." "More than once." The admission felt heavy, but Tarek knew it was necessary. "I underestimated you, your kind. I thought strength was all that mattered." Zach gave a small, understanding smile. "Strength comes in different forms. Physical power, yes, but also adaptability, endurance, and knowing when to ask for help. Earth taught us that." Tarek nodded slowly, the words resonating deeply. The lessons of the past 3 days began to crystallize in his mind. His perception of strength, shaped by a culture that valued dominance, had been expanded. Zach had shown him that survival required more than muscle. It demanded ingenuity, humility, and a willingness to learn from others. The two cadets left the debriefing chamber together, their movements no longer those of rivals but of equals. As they stepped into the main corridor of the academy, the bustling activity of their peers surrounded them. Tarek, for the first time, felt no need to assert himself. Instead, he found himself observing, listening, and considering the perspectives of those around him. In the weeks that followed, Tarek and Zach's paths crossed often. They continued to train together, their interactions marked by mutual respect and occasional camaraderie. Word of their collaboration during the desert simulation spread among the cadets, earning both recognition not only for their individual strengths, but for their ability to bridge the gap between their vastly different worlds. For Tarek, the experience became a turning point, shaping his approach to leadership and redefining his understanding of strength. For Zach, it was a reaffirmation of humanity's place in the galactic community not as a dominant force, but as a species capable of teaching and learning in equal measure. The Galactic Academy, with its mission of unity, had succeeded in more ways than one. In the crucible of the desert simulation, two cadets from opposite ends of the galaxy had found common ground. Their story became a symbol of what the Academy stood for: not just survival, but the shared journey toward understanding, cooperation, and growth. As Tarek reflected on the experience, he realized that the most profound lesson was not one he had been taught, but one he had discovered himself. True strength, he now understood, lay not in conquering others, but in the ability to adapt, to learn, and to forge connections across even the widest of divides.